I want to go back to March 21st. Sandy Fitzgerald wrote a piece for Newsmax titled 2016 GOP Hopefuls Meeting with Key Donors at Koch Party. And Sandy writes, a large group of Republican presidential hopefuls will gather for lunch at billionaire conservative David Koch's oceanfront mansion in Palm Beach, Florida on Sunday and meet face-to-face with some of the party's most influential contributors. This meeting is in the Koch's 30,000 square foot home. It's sponsored as a fundraiser for the Republican Governors Association. They note that membership in the program, which is only open to chief executives, wealthy philanthropists, and entrepreneurs, requires donors to cough up at least $25,000 a year to participate. Real estate mogul Donald Trump, who is one of the donors, also is scheduled to attend the event. Now, just follow along with me on this. Here we've got the Koch brothers in March of this year, or perhaps April. I mean, it was in the spring, bringing Scott Walker, Chris Christie, and Bobby Jindal, and Jeb Bush and Rick Perry, although Perry was not able to attend, down to David Koch's home in Florida to make their sales pitch to this group of billionaire donors. And among that group of billionaire donors was Donald Trump. Just think about this for a minute. If the billionaires decided that their guy, the guy who has most successfully and aggressively fulfilled the legacy of Ronald Reagan by destroying labor in Wisconsin, Scott Walker, and by, going after, all kinds of things. It's just most recently, right now, the story over on Center for American Progress's blog. Today, Scott Walker prepares a signed budget that eliminates the living wage and the prevailing wage. This is Alice Olstein writing. This is the budget that Scott Walker is presumably going to sign today in Wisconsin, because next week he's going to announce he's running for president. So he's got to get all these, they call them conservative. I would call them right-wing credentials. A repeal of wage protections for construction workers on local government projects. The elimination of a worker's right to one day off a week. Now your employer can require that you work 7 days a week. Loosened regulations on payday lenders, a provision to expedite approval for a tar sands pipeline that would bisect the state, and eliminates the state's longstanding living wage law and replaces all reference to a living wage with the phrase minimum wage, which is $7.25 in Wisconsin. It's the federal minimum wage. So here we are at the Koch brothers with a group of billionaires, including Donald Trump. And the Republican candidates are auditioning for them. And Jeb Bush gets up and says, now keep in mind, this is all my fantasy. Jeb Bush gets up, or my imagination. Jeb Bush gets up and says, hey, I had 80,000 African Americans thrown off the voting rolls in Florida so that my brother could, basically steal Florida in 2000 and become president. I know how to play dirty politics. I can become president. And Chris Christie gets up and says, hey, hell, you want dirty tricks? Have you ever heard of Bridgegate? And Bobby Jindal gets up and says, we're pretty much set to eliminate abortion altogether in Louisiana. And the Kochs and the billionaires are sitting there going, yeah, all this is nice, but what about our concerns? We're fossil fuel barons, right? The Kochs own millions of acres of tar sands oil up in Canada. What about the pipeline? What about labor? I mean, we've got all these companies. Some of them are even unionized. We've got all these companies that Koch Industries owns that, have these pesky workers who keep wanting raises and things. I mean, who's really going to crush the middle class? And Scott Walker stands up and says, not only am I going to do it, but I already did it in Wisconsin. They tried to kick me out. And, with a little money from the Koch brothers, I was able to beat back the recall election, and I ran for re-election, and I got reelected, and I can be the next president. Scott Walker says, I'm as slimy as Richard Nixon. When I was in college and running for elected office on campus, the local newspaper endorsed my opponent. My people stole all the newspapers from the newsstands. I've been lying and cheating through politics my entire life. We tried to do away with the sunshine disclosure laws, and if the press hadn't gotten a hold of it, we were trying to do it in the middle of the night, and the billionaires are nodding their heads going, yeah, this is our guy. Scott Walker's our guy. He is pursuing the Reagan agenda, and he's got the Nixon morality, mentality, zeitgeist. This is our guy. But the problem, and so all the candidates, Jeb Bush leaves, and Bobby Jindal leaves, and Chris Christie leaves, and Scott Walker leaves, and the billionaires are sitting around together talking. And one of them says, but what are we going to do about Jeb Bush? He's going to raise a pile of money. It was just announced today in the New York Times that he leads all the Republicans. He's the first 6 months of the year, while his official campaign has not raised all that much. His super PACs, he's got, I think it was 140 million, some mind-boggling amount of money. So the billionaires are sitting there going, Jeb Bush won't be terrible for us. He's going to protect our interests. He comes from an elite family, and his brother certainly protected our interests. But Scott Walker's really the guy we want. So who's going to take out Jeb Bush? And Donald Trump jumps up and raises his hand and says, I will. And they're like, really? How are you going to do that? And Donald Trump says, well, I'll run for president and I'll spend all my time bashing Jeb Bush and Rick Perry and, everybody except Scott Walker. I'll bloody them all up from the inside, and Scott Walker will be the only guy left. And you guys raise $800 million and you can make him president of the United States. So my question to you, I have not been able to find this. Now, granted, I haven't spent, days looking. But have you ever heard Donald Trump criticize Scott Walker? I heard him on TV in his interview with MSNBC. He called Chris Christie a blowhard or something like that. He called Jeb Bush a loser. Said it took him 5 days to figure out how to answer a question on Iraq. How do you expect him to negotiate with Iran? But I don't remember him saying one word about Scott Walker. Could it be that the billionaires got together and Donald Trump is part of this and we're all just being played for suckers? Remember, Nixon in 72 knew that Ed Muskie, the senator from Maine, would beat him in the general election. So somebody slipped some LSD in Ed Muskie's coffee, and Ed Muskie ended up during a campaign stop standing on the back of a flatbed truck hallucinating and crying about his wife. And suddenly he was out of the race and George McGovern was in, who Nixon knew he could beat. So Nixon's plan was, you don't win in the general election. You win by picking your opposition. Or making sure that your guy gets out there. So what do you think? Am I crazy?